Now, you've heard of Back to the Future, haven't you? Well, Ivor Tymchak, the Leeds comedian, compere, the guy who invented better culture, is going back to the future, going back to the 80s, but with a new twist. Life and How to Live It, that was something you'd be familiar with if you saw Sounds magazine in the 80s. Tell us about that, Ivor. What was the original incarnation of Life and How to Live It in the 80s?
I had the idea of wanting to do a strip cartoon, and I remember driving along, or I was the passenger of a car, and looking at, there was a young couple walking along the street in front of a newly built house, and the phrase "life and how to live it" popped into my head, and I suddenly thought, oh, that would be an interesting idea for a strip cartoon. And Sounds music paper, they particularly concentrate on the punk movement, and so I thought that might suit them, because it would have this punk attitude. So I wrote a few strips, sent it off to a mate of mine who was the artist, Nev Stanek. He illustrated it because he had this underground style which suited the punk ethic. Sent it off to Sounds and immediately got a phone call from the editor, Alan Lewis, who said, yeah, we like this, start next week. So that was it.
Because it was a kind of golden age for alternative publication, wasn't it? In Leeds we had Leeds of a paper that turned into Northern Star. And at that time, without the internet, if you wanted to publish something that was a bit of an alternative view, a bit scurrilous, it had to be ink on paper.
Yeah.
So how did Sounds react when the two of you, two art school graduates, turned up and just said, we want to be a cartoon pair team for you?
Well, unfortunately, I never actually went into the office because I live hundreds of miles away. I just sent it in by snail mail. But it was the phone call that I got from him that it was the most exciting day of my life, I reckon, Richard. Because he just said, because he's the first kind of gatekeeper. So he looks through all the submissions and thinks, oh, that might be all right. And then, because he told me this over the phone, then he sends it round the office and sees what the response is. And he says, Life and How to Live It idea got an immediate thumbs up. Everyone went, yeah, this is good, this is good. So that's why I said, right, start next week. And so then it was a case of getting on to Nev and saying, we have to start producing these things now because it's every week. And that was an interesting ride as well, actually, having a deadline. It was all right. I remember listening to some disc jockey saying, being on radio, it's a bit like being married to a nymphomaniac. It's great for the first few weeks. And then you have to start thinking, hang on, we need to come with new ideas every week. So, but anyway, that's by the by. So yeah, there were so many fanzines and that kind of thing, like you say, ink on paper. That was the golden age, if there is such a thing.
So is there a market for it in 2020?
This is what I want to find out. When I went through the bookshops and saw all these Ladybird type parody books, I thought, well, that's what I was doing nearly 40 years ago, so presumably there is a market there. It's just finding it. So, which is why I sent the old strips to a publisher, Bad Press Inc., and they went, yeah, we like it, yeah, still relevant.
Well, for those who are younger than we are, who don't remember that kind of 80s time, you've told us it's a bit punky, you've told us it's a bit counterculture, it's a bit like the Ladybird satires. What would you, if you had to describe Life and How to Live It in a sentence, how would you put it?
It's as if a scientist was looking at the way people live in society and was breaking down the motivation, the what's involved and the causality, etc., and coming out with dry statements about the findings, and the result is funny. Trust me on that, because it's so kind of, oh yeah, it just sounds absurd, which it is. Ultimately, it is, but you have to accept it because there's kind of a rationale behind it. It's been deconstructed. There it is. That's why you do what you do. Oh yeah, I get it.
Now, it's a collaborative effort. You work with a guy who does the pictures, a cartoonist. You do the words. I understand, certainly back in the 80s, you didn't even see the published cartoon until the day Sounds came out.
That's right. We got so blasé about the deadline and I was kind of running out of strips that I'd prepared beforehand, that it was a case of, right, we need to write something for this week's edition. So I'd write it and then I'd phone it through to my mate who lived hundreds of miles away, and he invariably left it to the last minute, so he would do it the night before and then he had to post it using special delivery, which cost a fortune, so it would guarantee to arrive on the day of the print run. So I wouldn't see what he'd done until I opened the newspaper, and there it was. And quite often it was like, that's a great idea. That's a great interpretation of what I'd written.
So how's it going to work in 2020?
Well, it's a lot easier to see the thing beforehand because you can just email it and I can see it.
But the collaboration is still important.
Yeah, I think because it worked so well in the past and his style hasn't changed, that it'd be easy to see if we can still talk to the youth and to see if it's still relevant, which I think it is, because.
And what message do you want the youth of today to take from it?
Well, I keep advocating for radical change in society. I mean, there are so many stupid things that. I mean, just the idea of infinite growth on a finite planet, Richard. That's the kind of scientific, well, let's look at the feasibility of this. And immediately you come out with, it doesn't work, does it? And yet, every government in the world keeps banging on about growth. So, I'd like us to be a bit more realistic about, let's look at the data. Let's look at how we're doing things and asking the hard questions about, is this sensible? Is there an alternative?
But at one end of the scale, it's the big ideas like infinite growth. At the other end, it's the minutiae like electric gates. How do the two fit together?
Extrapolation, Richard. If you can accept, actually, perhaps I don't need that electric gate because the wooden one I've got is perfectly adequate. But of course, the electric gate manufacturers who are looking at their growth charts are thinking, we're not selling as many electric gates as we thought we were. But of course, electric gates are essential. But it's still that mindset of, but we need growth. The consumerism needs this churn of people buying stuff that isn't essential to keep the fallacy of infinite growth going.
Now, the gateway to get into this is lifeandhowtoliveit.inc. So that's where we need to go. Sign up there, and what you're going to give them if they sign up?
They'll get a regular email, a newsletter, that includes one of the old cartoons from the archive and a new one that'll be coloured, because we're in the modern age now and we've got computers, we can colour it easier. So if they sign up, they'll get a regular update, and a lot of the topics will be current ones, so there might even be one about masks in the short-term future. So keep an eye out for that. Sign up for the
And why now? Why is this the right moment to bring it back?
We live in interesting times, Richard, and, which is a Chinese curse, of course, but you can't fight it. So it just seems like the absurdities of life are there to be exposed. Because
the 80s was a time of radical change, wasn't it? We had the whole kind of Thatcherite idea coming through. And there was a lot of anger that was expressed through punk and expressed through the art of the time, or some strands of that. Do you think we're living in similar times now?
Yes, I genuinely believe that we will get interesting art in the coming years because of the injustice, the inequality, the poverty that is going to, the unemployment, etc., etc. Which is what we need. I think we've just got too smug as a society for our own good.
But you never lose a sense of humour in it all.
Well, hopefully that's what makes it attractive for the. Because if you get something unpalatable, you're going to want to reject it. Which is why comedians were always so well loved in society, because they can gently take the mick out of society and various genres, and people are more inclined to accept it because it's got that, it's a comedian. But at the back of the mind, they're thinking, actually, that's a good point there. Yeah. So that's the idea behind Life and How to Live It. That there's jokes in there, but ultimately there's a lasting effect that people think, actually, what do I really need to do that? Or
and it's a matter of sign up for the email and you'll find out the developments in real time. Is the internet making a big difference for you? The fact you've got this instant communication with an audience rather than having to go down the newsagent and buy a copy of Sounds with potentially note or whatever.
I was just thinking today, Rich, it's a double-edged sword, the internet, because I was wasting so much time on social media this morning, and I thought, I'm getting to the stage where I'm thinking I should really stop doing this. It's such a waste of time. And yet the nugget of the gem that you pick up as a result of social media, it's like, what is it worth it just for that? But ultimately I'm thinking it probably isn't. So maybe it's time to move on to, I don't know, ink on paper again. What? Because when you think, well, actually, there are only so many stories you can put on a sheet of paper. That means you're going to have to be a lot more careful, a lot more judgmental about what goes in. So the quality is going to have to go up. So I'm thinking that there might be a comeback in that. So
back to where we started, back to the future.
It goes round in cycles, doesn't it? Everything's cyclical, and eventually we'll end up thinking, how should we live? That's the ultimate question, Richard. It asks, how should we live? There's no definitive answer, but it demonstrates that there are many wrong answers, and we need to be aware of them.
So lifeandhowtoliveit.inc, that's the way into it all. Ivor Tymchak, thank you very much indeed.